Welcome to On the Mark. I'm your host, Mark Rubin. I am so excited to present this podcast series addressing our rapidly changing world and how it is affecting industries and people in unique and interesting ways. As John F. Kennedy once said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. The business leaders and personalities who I will be interviewing in these podcasts certainly look to the future. And I hope you come away with information and inspiration that helps you adapt in both your business and personal lives. You can find these podcasts on all major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, GoetzPlatzer.com. Good morning. Welcome to On the Mark, another episode, and I'm very excited about today's episode because it has to deal with my law firm, Goetz Platzer, and its growth. Part of the reason that Goetz Platzer was formed was to bring in a younger generation of partners, to bring in a new vitality, and to take this firm into its third generation. And critical to that is we have one of our superstar young partners here. His name is Adam Koblenz, who we'll be speaking to. I want to talk a little about what Adam does, what he does in the firm, what he does in his outside life, because he's got a whole other life in the political sector that he deals with. And we're going to cover how he would like to see Goetz Platzer go or grow, sorry, and what he's doing. So welcome to On the Mark, Adam.
Thank you, Howard. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me today.
So Adam, you've come along to Goetz Platzer from your own firm. You weren't part of the Goetz group or part of the Platzer group. You were in another group, and we convinced you to join the firm.
Absolutely. So I was at another firm for about 14 years, named partner there on Long Island, and an opportunity came about probably about 2 years ago where you, Howard, and another Howard Jaslow, who I've known over the years, were contemplating a merger. The merger was very exciting to me. And I was thinking about my future, and I was thinking about the next generation of lawyers that were going to come up in my firm. And I thought this was just a really exciting once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Well, I think you brought a lot of new energy and a lot of new ideas to the firm. And I think you're a critical part of the future of the firm. Why don't we start off with talking about what you actually do? What type of law do you do? What I understand you're doing is basically you act as outside general counsel to a lot of closely held companies, and that it would entail whatever they need, you're there for. So tell us a little bit how you would define your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that introduction. So I cut my teeth at a larger firm out of law school in their commercial litigation department. So it sort of ran the gamut of anything from breach of contract issues to labor, all the way through insurance matters. And from there, my practice sort of evolved. And I started to develop relationships with closely held businesses. And then it became apparent to me that in order to meet their needs, my practice would have to grow and expand and reach other areas of the law, such as employment, labor, corporate, real estate, and then touching upon their personal lives, these business owners, in the trust and estates field and succession planning, spaces as well.
So you said you started at a larger firm. Now, at a larger firm, you're an associate. I assume you're an associate, didn't work in as a partner. Mm-hmm. At a larger firm, they're not interested in you growing. They're interested in you servicing their clients and doing their work. How did you transition to go from being a worker to someone who has their own client base? And what was your plan to get to the point of the growth of your practice?
So, since I was, much younger, even in high school, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. And it always, was part of, my thinking coming out of law school that I would, essentially get the training and the tools that I would need. And then eventually I would develop a business plan. And so what happened was about 15 years ago, as I was transitioning from the firm that I started with, where, to your point, I was an associate. I was working around the clock, nights, weekends, and actually got the second chair a trial in my, in federal court. So a lot of great experience from there. But I put together a business plan, and from there, I really stuck to that plan. I started to organize my practice, I took, hundreds of meetings with strategic partners, referral sources, in all kinds of fields, accounting, insurance, other lawyers who are great referral sources. And from there, as some of these folks started to grow in their own businesses, they started to think of me. And so what I try to do is, much like you, is be a resource, somebody that, even if I'm not going to end up working on a matter, that can put somebody in touch. And I think it's part of being in those types of networks that usually yield, some other relationships.
And when you made this transition, did you jump from being an associate and one day say that, okay, I think I have enough business. Now I'm going to go out on my own, or I'm going to join another firm? How did that actually happen?
So it's very interesting. There's always growing pains in any development of business. And so what started to happen was, and it became a good problem, was I started to have, enough on my plate from the partners' work that I was servicing, and other work that was starting to come in, independently on my own. And then eventually it went from a sort of a 50-50 type of split to, you know, a, essentially 100% of my own work. It inspired me to become a better lawyer. The buck always stops, obviously, with the attorney that's handling the matter. And so I think it really also sharpened my, client development skills, my relationship skills. And so there was a transitional phase where it started to become apparent to the partnership at my prior firm that I had enough business to sustain myself. And I always think before you can, move away in some ways from, working on other partners' work, you have to have a full plate. But at the same time, I try to be a very good partner. So when other partners have work, I try to handle their work and help them, because it's all part of the growth of the business itself. But for me, that was a transitional phase. And then I started getting very heavily involved in law practice management. So starting to really put together a whole set of spreadsheets and, essentially a way of organizing the practice so that when things came in, we were servicing them, assigning the right, attorneys to them. And then obviously, hopefully getting good results for the clients.
See, I've always felt that when you have younger attorneys, you're trying to train them, you want to see if they have an entrepreneurial spirit, because those are the people that are going to grow and understand what a client's needs are. If all they're doing is billing time, they're not professionally growing. And I know at Goetz Platzer and at my prior firm, Goetz Fitzpatrick, we always encourage attorneys who have that bent to bring in business, and we compensate them for some of the business that they bring in. And I think that's part of professional growth. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. One thing they don't teach you in law school is the business of law. And I have just as much interest in the business of law as I do the practice of law. And it was really a breeding ground and a training ground in my last firm to see the inside of, the business of law and how it operates, managing, client expectations, understanding, what clients are anticipating as far as bills go, how to even generate bills, how to work with other associates. And there's a whole other component to the business. And I think it's important also for a firm to begin to identify those attorneys, or at least empower attorneys to have that ability to try to grow. So if they want that path, I think you have to give them the tools. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that, the associates are going to be out, during the day, 8 hours a day, all out and about. But there are ways that you can foster growth. You can help, subsidize different groups that they're involved with, charitable organizations, things that become feeders for development of relationships.
And you talked about how your practice is kind of centered on being outside general counsel. So you touch a lot of different areas of the law because of these people. Are there particular industries that you work in primarily, or is it just a general,
Sure.
practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's been really terrific, to have a variety of industries to draw upon. So I have clients that are in the manufacturing space. They could be, iron and metal workers that are, fabricating, different things for, let's say, bus stops and, other municipalities with certain kinds of needs. to distributors. I have a client that distributes surgical instruments from overseas. And then I have clients that, are serial entrepreneurs where they're involved in all kinds of businesses. It could be retail and apparel. It could be real estate development. And so that's what's kind of kept things interesting for me. And even, I've had matters involving the entertainment space, involving the music business and, recording artists. So for me, the intersection of culture and politics and law and clients, have really kept things, fascinating for me.
Well, you mentioned politics, and I don't. Listeners should know that Adam is very involved in politics. That he was recently elected as mayor of Roslyn Heights, Roslyn Estates. I'm sorry, Roslyn Estates. And before that, he was, I think, the town justice
Yep.
for Roslyn Estates. And I know your family has a history in politics, and I know that you have a strong interest in politics. How did that come about that you decided to get involved in politics?
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. My father's an attorney as well. Out of law school, he was a federal prosecutor as an assistant U.S. attorney.
Does he also wear bow ties too? Or is
You
it
know
just
what? Actually, I help him tie his own bow ties
Ah.
when he has weddings. From there, I sort of caught the political bug, as you will. As you mentioned, he's been mayor of a neighboring municipality for many years. And so about 20 years ago, I interned with Senator Schumer, and then I was an intern at Senator John Kerry's office in Massachusetts while I was enrolled at Brandeis University in Waltham. And it was at the time in, I believe, 2002, I believe, when John Kerry had launched his presidential campaign. So New Hampshire being one of the biggest primaries, I got a chance to stand in the cold and learn the ropes of presidential campaigning. And from there, it sort of morphed into other roles. I've always had, a civic-minded approach that I think does stem from my father. I was a volunteer fireman in Roslyn for many years. I became the village prosecutor in a few different villages, like you mentioned, a judge, and then an opportunity arose where I live now to explore being the mayor. And the current mayor had stepped down, and he was a mentor to me. I decided that now would be a good time to see if I could, give back a little bit to the community and maybe hopefully add some value too.
now in local politics, in your politics? There's really not the political parties. It's really more that you run on your own merits and you're
Mhm.
not tied to one political party. I don't think that's happening in the country now. I think we're probably more divided than ever.
Yep.
Most people can have a civil conversation about politics. They have a very strong opinion about the present government. But let's talk about how politics and the decisions in politics affect your clients. Let's talk about tariffs, for instance, which is a big issue that's every day. You see the stock market plummeting, at least the last few days, because of uncertainty or tariffs or what's going to happen. Uh, are these issues that you find are concerning to your client, tariffs and the effect of the tariffs?
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head. I have a client in particular that, actually is a distributor of aluminum and steel medical instruments. And when the executive order came down from the current administration, that lent itself, to, some fear, but it also became, topic of conversation, an analysis that we had to do, an approach we had to take to business, and an understanding of how it would impact pricing moving forward, because it's a trickle down effect. When you're importing and distributing and you're coming from overseas, you've got cargo, you've got shipping, you've got port representatives, air freighting. So every industry gets impacted, especially if the price of fuel goes up, right? So how that impacts our client is something that we have to analyze on a daily basis. And so it also comes into contracts. It might create events of force majeure, similar to what we all experienced in COVID with a lot of our real estate clients that, who had their doors closed, by government order at the time, and trying to be in real time, keep up with the administration's day to day orders is something I think that something that keeps me focused and on my toes at the same time.
I know I have clients similar to yours. I act as general counsel to a lot of clients. And one of the things that I'm thinking of when I'm doing contracts where people are buying widgets, whatever that widget is, and they're buying it from overseas at a fixed price, and there's going to be deliveries later on. I think in the contracts now, you have to deal with the possibility and the effect of tariffs on the price of the goods, and whether the same volume of goods are going to come in, or whether the tariffs are going to affect whether it makes it economically feasible to do that. Is that something that you're looking at with your clients when you're looking at contracts, and the terms of the contracts have to now take into account tariffs? I want to give you one slight aside before you answer the question. I once did a contract with a guy who lived through the Depression. This was a while ago. And he put in all his contracts that if the US dollar was devalued, the money that he gets on his contract increases by the amount of the valuation of the US dollar. And he put that in the contract back then because that's what he grew up in Europe, and he saw the devaluation of the dollar. But I think that we may be facing the same types of issues here with recession because of tariffs or other issues. Is that something you're considering or take into account in contract situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the geopolitical climate over the years, especially with cyclical events where you've got, for instance, in the banking industry, some of the collapses in the big fail in 2008, 2009, similar to what you're referring to. You have to have this flexibility of these reservations of rights and clauses, so that your clients don't get sort of hurt by a fixed contract. It's interesting in real estate, similar to what we're discussing now in the context of tariffs. In the wake of '08, with downfall of Lehman and some of the other banks and Bear Stearns and so forth, I see contracts now that say that if a proposed purchaser, a borrower of a particular bank, is unable to get financing because that bank actually fails and goes down, without any wrongdoing on their part, or malicious intent, they should have the right to get their deposit back. And so I think, as we see also with COVID and force majeure and leasing clauses, the world and the political climate, I think, starts to dictate what becomes commercially reasonable in agreements as well.
Right. I know you deal in the real estate realm. One of the issues that I face, because I'm also in that realm, is that B and C buildings, particularly in New York City, are having problems with occupancy. And the problem with that is that refinancing comes up with banks usually every 5 to 7 years. And a bank won't refinance a building unless it has a certain amount of occupancy, because they want to know that there's the rent to get paid. And a lot of these buildings are unable to refinance. Some of them are looking to repurpose into residential space. That's not possible for a lot of them. Others are looking for other ways to get different types of tenants that may be able to pay the rent. How are your clients addressing this post-COVID world where people are working a lot virtually still, and they need less space? And what do you tell landlords who have these types of buildings?
Sure, it's definitely a challenging and evolving marketplace, especially in commercial office space, retail tenancies. And what we're trying to do here is also figure out, where does the zoning sort of fit in to repurposing? I have some clients, like for instance in the Bronx right now, I have a client that is zoned in a manufacturing district, and the building is outfitted for a particular manufacturing use, but it's so antiquated now at this point in time that really there are no tenants that are going to be able to fit that bill. And so I think the city and the state now are also looking at ways to incentivize property owners and to provide that type of assistance to kind of think about the future, because what we don't want to have here, obviously, is a crash, right? We're not looking, banks are not in the business of owning buildings, or being in foreclosure. And so Part of it, I think, too, is an understanding from some of these lenders about developing these relationships, because you get this default interest and these skyrocketing default provisions, and they're just too onerous for anybody that's looking to refi or to save their own property. And so I think it has to be a recognition from the lenders as well as to what the realities are in the marketplace.
Do you find a lot of your clients are cutting back on spending because of fears of possibly a recession, less consumer spending, uh, higher costs of importing goods? Do you find that they're changing the way that they're looking at business in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have some clients that are downsizing, unfortunately, in personnel. Others that have hiring freezes. I think it's a direct impact on this uncertainty in the market. And having enough business, having enough work, and enough need, for individuals, to be on payroll. And so yeah, I think right now, in the first 75 days of the year, or 90 days at this point, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, which we're seeing in real time now, being April 4th in the marketplace as well.
And I know something that I became very aware of before COVID. When I was interviewing an associate, they'd want to know, how much am I going to make, and what's my chance of advancement. Now, the number one question I get when I interview someone is, how many days a week do I have to be in the office?
Mhm.
And I think that's true not just in the legal field, but in a lot of other industries, that people want to work virtually. Are you finding that working virtually, let's start with the law firm and then other businesses,
Sure.
is it working, or is it stunting the growth of people who are trying to learn and become better as lawyers or whatever industry they are, and they're not getting the same training because they're working virtually? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, it's a terrific question. I came up sort of on the cusp of that millennial generation. I consider myself old school. I look at the legal profession, much like other professions, as apprenticeships. And the only way to sort of advance is with experience and with close relationships with attorneys with experience and wisdom. And so, to answer it more directly, I'm more in favor of an approach to having lawyers and business owners be able to have their attorneys and other employees in the office more regularly, more full time. I think right now it's a disadvantage for this generation that's graduating and coming up, let's say first through fifth year. I understand, why it's appealing, and to want to kind of work from home Friday and Monday. It almost has a feel to a 4-day weekend, but I think it creates a disadvantage. And as an associate, you have to start to think, where do I want to be 5 to 10 years from now? And I think if you're out of sight, out of mind, I think it becomes very difficult for advancement. And I also think when you're servicing clients, the benefit a client gets of that interpersonal interaction is that there's a level of communication that's happening on a regular basis, which I think puts you at a disadvantage when you're working, separately in two different locations.
And how do your clients feel about that? In other words, I agree with you, as the law firms and training people, it's probably the same thing I would find with accounting firms and service businesses. But in other industries, uh, I think people have kind of gotten spoiled in that once you work at home, it's hard to come back. It's hard to turn back the clock. Although some companies are requiring people to come in more. I think I read that Google is retiring.
Mhm.
It's just put in a rule that people have to come in 4 days instead of 3 days a week. And other companies are doing that. Do you think that's going to be successful, or there's going to be a lot of pushback and it's never going to go back to the way it was?
Yeah, no, it's I think the world has certainly changed. I mean, you see it also with professional attire and dress and all kinds of other types of policies, I think. But yeah, I have clients that are struggling to retain talent, and in the marketplace we live in now, that's an issue, where if two employers are offering two different sort of opportunities, one at home and one in the office, typically speaking, the latter will, I mean, the individual will want to take that opportunity at home. I think it creates less productivity, frankly, for the business itself. I think it's also harder to sort of, kind of supervise and evaluate that type of thing. And I think it does impact the clients over time. I think the clients face similarly what we're facing as well. Which is why it becomes very critical for a supervising attorney in our firm really to be present in the office at all times, because you need to leave that client with, a sense and an understanding that the work is being done and it's being handled correctly, regardless of where everybody might be.
I know that we've relaxed our dress codes over the last few years. You're, I don't know, I want to call you a dinosaur, but you're old school in that you're always well dressed. You're always actually one of the best dressed people in the office, and you dress impeccably. But people sometimes coming in who sometimes I see equity partners wearing jeans.
Mhm.
People, wearing not button-down shirts, but wearing like some kind of a pullover shirt. That would have never happened before. And I wonder, is that important? Because is it important to, do you think, to dress right, to feel that you're professional? Because if you're not dressing professionally, can you act professionally? Does it change your mindset? Or does it not matter and you can just have everyone come in jeans and a beat up t-shirt, and as long as they're good lawyers, it doesn't really make a difference? How do you feel about that?
Like I said, I am very old school. I believe that when you put on the attire, it puts you in a certain mindset. It's similar to where, I used to go to the library to study. I never could actually study when I was home, when I was in college or law school. And so I kind of take the same approach with law firm practice, which is when you're at the office, I think it puts you in a certain mindset. For me, dressing very consistently every single day is also some messaging that I'm sending to the next generation, which is, I know it's easier to put on a pullover, for a golf shirt, but if you take that extra step, not only will your colleagues see that, but your clients will see that. And for me, the bow tie has also become a marketing tool as well. People tend to remember you, they look for it, they comment on it, and I've evolved over time. I had 25 something years ago, there was one partner at another firm that I was working at, and he would wear it. And that was one of the reasons I got into it. And I've really enjoyed it. I mean, there's also some practical uses, which, when you're wearing a seatbelt, and when you go to a restaurant, you don't get a little sauce or a little oil on the tie, but it is a mindset. And so it's very deliberate every morning in how I get dressed, because I think it's also showing others that I care enough about how I dress, which means I probably am projecting to clients that I care also about their work as well.
So I agree with you, and I think that's true. Do you think, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, that law firms, particularly our law firm, but law firms generally, should invoke more strict dress codes in the office for attorneys and
No,
staff?
at the firm I was at before for nearly 15 years, it was a very conservative shop where every day the men wore neckties and the women wore, formal attire. So I think I got very accustomed to that. But that firm was an outlier in that approach. Some firms also have an approach where, if you're in court, you're meeting with a client, that's when you sort of, kind of dress to the nines. I think you can strike a balance, right? Obviously there are casual Fridays and other types of opportunities that you can extend. But I think if there is symmetry, it doesn't have to be, the full tuxedo that I've got. But if there is symmetry and there's some consistency, I think just like any team, I played college tennis. I think it creates a somewhat of a team approach, because you're all doing the same thing and you're all being very consistent with each other on.
I know in the time that I practiced law, the practice of law has changed so much. I mean, we used to have fax machines, we had full libraries, we had paper that we
Yep.
actually needed paper,
Yep.
and the practice has changed tremendously. And the new I wouldn't call it an issue, but the new factor that's coming into practice law that I see a lot is this artificial intelligence, this AI, and how that's going to affect the practice of law, how that should be used, when it should be used. How do you see AI affecting your practice or the practice of law generally?
It's very interesting. I've had this conversation come up a few times with clients, with friends in other industries and other lawyers, and it. I think AI can be, a very useful tool. I think I view AI as, of course, it's part of the future, but I think there's a certain component to the law where, there's a human element, right? You have case law, right? I'm not going to rely on a some algorithm to confirm that the case that I'm citing to still has precedential value, hasn't been overturned. There isn't some other issue, and that sort of thing where there's a mixed split amongst the courts. I also fear too that if you get into a habit of AI and you start submitting briefs to the court, it's going to lend itself, perhaps, I think, maybe to this issue of plagiarism, other types of ethical issues. And I think when you're training lawyers, I think that they should stay away from AI for several years, out of school, because, I think the nuts and bolts of practice really do require that you have legal research and writing skills. But I do believe that the utility of it is to actually get started, with certain projects. So it helps inspire and get things off the ground. What I am actually finding now is that my clients actually are dropping my work product into Chat GPT and then sending me the results. So, whereas the client used to be the one with the feedback, this is strong, this is weak, this could be developed. I now have, an algorithm telling me, where I can do better. And so that's actually been an evolving, concept that's come up now more recently.
See, I think that the growth of AI in law, particularly, is inevitable. I understand the issues of making sure that the AI is correct, because sometimes it's not, but the AI is getting better and better as generations go on. And I know that I had a case recently that I'm working on where there really wasn't a lot of case law on it. I thought it was somewhat unique. And I used AI to direct me as to where I could find something about the case
Mhm.
and where I could go, or what type of argument I could use to establish something. And it had to do with, whether it was in the real estate brokerage industry, whether a broker who doesn't work under another broker can help that broker if he's not being compensated. If he's being compensated, he can't. But if he's not, and there really was no case law on it,
Mhm.
so AI pulled things from all different jurisdictions and gave me all kinds of arguments. Now, I'm not going to rely on that totally, but it gave me a tremendous starting point that if I had to do that without use of the AI, it would have been a tremendous amount of time, and it's a tremendous amount of savings for the client.
I agree.
I think, to be able to use AI, and I think it's inevitable in the legal practice that we're going to see more and more of it. It's not going away.
No, not at all. And it's like any evolved technology, over time, the population tends to embrace it and try to get their hands around it. And I completely agree with you that sometimes you're looking for that one little element of assistance. And I think AI can actually move the process forward. And I think it will be a great savings and benefit to the clients in the future for sure.
Where would you like to see Goetz Platzer go in the future? In what direction? Where do you see the growth of the firm? We were a merger of basically a firm that was in the financial services industry and a firm that was in the real estate construction industry. Although we have other practice areas, we have a large estate practice area, and we practice in other areas. Those are the two largest practice areas. You came from a third source and with more of a generalist, I would think. Where do you see the firm going in the future?
It's a great question. And I think,
Where would you like to see it go?
of course, after, working on Long Island for 18 years and now commuting every day, I love being in the city. It's really, for me, the city marketplace is something that's really opened up my whole world, especially in contacts and clients. As far as where I see it evolving, I think we have a lot of wonderful pieces. I think, there's a element of corporate practice, which I think is a fulcrum for, cross marketing and business development. And I think if we can put a couple of institutional pieces, it will, I think, expand the practice into, a more of a full service practice. And so when you're out in the marketplace, whether it's corporate, environmental, your attorneys have a platform where essentially we do just about everything. And I think that does help inspire business development. For me, I just turned 44, and God willing, the next 30 years, I want to be here. Growth for the sake of growth is always something that I think firms grapple with. We're about, I think, 40 plus lawyers now, and so for me, the biggest change for me has been joining a firm with 10 equity partners versus 4 or 5 over the last decade. And so for me, I think having other business generators and hopefully inspiring the next generation, much like you're doing, in terms of, laying a foundation for the third generation is something that I want to be a part of. And so, as part of this third generation, I think one of my goals is to create that legacy that you've created, for the next generation. And so I think part of it is also paying it forward, right? And I think starting to empower, identify, and lay the foundation for the next generation.
I found in my years of practice that the best clients for me are the clients that use me for anything. They'll call me no matter what the problem. They'll know I don't even do it. It could be a criminal case or a landlord-tenant case, and they'll call me, and I'm the resource for them. And that's how I like to be considered. And I know that you kind of have that same kind of mindset. I'm of the opinion, and tell me if you agree with this, that people don't really hire law firms. They hire a lawyer. And it's important to get a lawyer that you trust, a lawyer that you feel is looking out for your interests. And it doesn't matter so much whether that lawyer can do the exact issue or handle the exact issue you have, but that person's going to be there and making sure that he's going to get someone that can handle the exact issue. And that's important in a law firm because we want to be able to delegate work to other lawyers. We want to have relationships with other firms, but the firm doesn't do it. How do you feel about the concept that people hire lawyers? They'll hire Adam Koblenz. They won't be hiring Goetz Platzer, really. They're really interested in hiring you, and this happens to be your platform.
I agree with you. Having just moved from my prior firm to this firm about 8 months ago, it was the first time in my career where I sort of tested that theory, and I found that the theory bared out exactly that it was all relationship driven. And I think it's interesting you just said that. In the last let's say 24 hours, I've gotten calls about education law. I've gotten calls where somebody recently passed away, and now they're worried about the estate planning. And these clients know what I do and what I specialize in, and also what I don't do. But they're looking for that resource. They're looking for that relationship. And so, for me, the best clients are the long-term clients. And I always say, if I'm on somebody's Rolodex, that's all I need to be, because it could be today, it could be 5 years from now, and you also never know where things are going to lead. And very interestingly enough, I got referred this morning, and an individual said, "I'd like to refer you to my brother." It turned out that his brother is already a client of mine, and it was just very small world. So I think relationships are everything, but I do think also the image of the firm and what its capabilities are. I also do think from a corporate perspective, when you might have companies that are looking at you, is also very important to project the right image.
I mean, the image that I would like to see for Goetz Platzer is that if you come to a partner at Goetz Platzer, that partner is going to be there for you and is going to do the right thing by you. We're not about just spilling your hours. We're about making sure that we have long-term relationships with our clients and that we have partners who value those clients. And we're a collection of lawyers and particularly partners who are going to treat clients as the reason we're in business, not just a source of money. How do you feel about that?
I feel the same way. I handle a lot of business divorce dissolution type cases
Right.
between closely held businesses, between partners, where there can be a lot of acrimony and they're breaking up. And these can be some of the worst times professionally in some of these business owners' lives. And when you can show empathy, you could show care, and you could also help them navigate that and figure out where they want to be 2 months from now, 6 months, a year from now. Those experiences are life-changing experiences. And I think to your point, having that relationship is, I think, the most important element, because without that, like you said, there's so many good lawyers out there, but what differentiates somebody, I think, is that personal element.
Right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. Went really quick. These podcasts are about 40 minutes, and we were a little over that now. But is there anything that you want to tell our listeners who are thinking about hiring a lawyer or a law firm that you think is important for them to consider when they're making those decisions?
Absolutely. I live and breathe client and customer service. I think having a responsive lawyer, a responsive firm, I think is one of the most critical elements to proper handling of a matter, a successful matter, and also development of a relationship. And I think when you come to Goetz Platzer, not only are you going to have a personal element and that high quality service, but I think you're going to leave here with a feeling that the attorneys care for you on a personal level. They want to see you do well, both in business and personally. And so, from my perspective, I always want to leave a client feeling like they were the most important client. I make sure in a lot of my emails to ensure clients or assure clients that they are a top priority. And I think that is what we want to project as a firm.
Well, Adam, thank you for coming on the Mark and letting our listeners know a little about your practice and about you. And I think it's important for those people out there when they're hiring a lawyer. You want a lawyer like Adam who puts your interests first. We shouldn't just be about billing. We have to be about service. We're in a service business, and we have to service our clients in the right way. So thank you for listening to On the Mark today. I hope you got some great tips and enjoyed this episode. I know that I did. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Mark. I started this podcast by quoting John F. Kennedy and would like to end it with quoting one of my favorite baseball players, Nolan Ryan. Enjoying success requires the ability to adapt. Only by being open to change will you have a true opportunity to get the most from your talent. I wish you success in staying ahead of the curve instead of behind the 8 ball. Thank you for tuning in.